of Massachusetts. She serves on the Banking Committee in the Senate. Senator Warren, thanks for being here. So, Speaker Ryan, you heard him say $1,200 in savings a year for the average family of four. He's also saying middle-income folks that will allow them to pay for gas for a year, pay down debt, renovate their home, save for retirement. Now, I know you oppose the part of this bill that goes to wealthier Americans and corporate America, but could you support the part that will help middle-income Americans?
So, look, Jake, if they really wanted to sit down and write a tax proposal that would help middle-income families, I would be all on this. For 20 years now, I've been fighting for help for median-income families, for middle-class families, for working families, for paycheck-to-paycheck families. But that's not what this is about. This is a tax proposal that raises taxes on some people who are middle class, and what it mostly does is the middle class part is to distract attention from the fact that they're planning to give away $2 trillion in tax giveaways to a handful of giant corporations. Number one on the list, do you know who's going to make the most money out of this? It's projected to be Wells Fargo. You remember Wells Fargo, the group that the bank that cheated its customers by opening fake accounts for them. The next group that's going to make out big are going to be foreign investors, wealthy foreign investors who are going to walk away with about $700 billion in tax benefits. And the third big group, multinational corporations who will be given bonuses in effect for building their factories, for putting their jobs everywhere except America. Let's face it, this is a tax proposal that is just a payoff to rich donors to the Republican Party. What we need is something that really works for middle-class families, and this isn't it.
Well, Republicans argue that it's geared towards the middle class because it maintains maximum 401k contributions. It nearly doubles the standard deduction. There's a new family tax credit. It caps the mortgage deduction at $500,000. Aren't those all things good for middle Americans that you could get behind?
But here's the problem, Jake. When they give away $2 trillion to giant corporations, they're going to blow a hole in the debt. And the minute they blow a hole in the debt, the Republicans are going to come back to the American people and say, gee, so sorry, debt really jumped. What's going to happen now is we got to cut Medicare, and we got to cut Medicaid, and we got to cut this, and we got to cut that. Oh, and we got to cut infrastructure. Look, if the Republicans really think that they've got $2 trillion to spend, I've got some ideas on how to spend it. How about we really put that money into infrastructure investment that will create good jobs right here in America right now? Or how about if we just forgive the outstanding student loan debt and let those young people get out there and start their businesses and keep working? Or how about if we just write a check for $17,000 to every family in America that makes less than $200,000? That's what you could do with the $2 trillion that the Republicans are shoveling out the door to giant corporations. This isn't about trying to help the middle class. This is about trying to help the big corporate donors to the Republican Party and then put a pretty face on it.
Do you disagree with the notion that a lot of this corporate tax reduction will not only help big corporations, it will also help smaller corporations and cause economic growth that could help middle-class Americans in terms of jobs, in terms of wages?
So let's look at the part about jobs and wages. This has been the big Republican lie for decades now. They have argued that, hey, if we just cut taxes for those at the top, somehow it's going to trickle down and benefit everybody else. And the reality is, it just isn't true. When the George W. Bush tax cuts went through in the early 2000s, corporations made out great. And what happened to hardworking families? Flat wages. When the British cut taxes, cut the corporate tax rate by 11 points, what happened to wages? They actually went down. Look, this is a point in America when corporations are making record profits. They have cash. They have plenty of money. If they wanted to make investments here in America, in jobs here in America, they could do it. The idea that if we just give them a couple of $1 trillion more of taxpayer money, that somehow they're going to make everybody else rich, it is an insult to hardworking middle-class families. That argument is so wrong.
I want to ask you one other question, Senator. We learned today from former Democratic National Committee Chairwoman Donna Brazile that the Clinton campaign, in her view, did rig the presidential nominating process by entering into an agreement to control day-to-day operations at the DNC. The Clinton campaign controlling the party's staffing, strategy, finances, communications, and that agreement was entered into in August 2015, a year before she defeated Senator Bernie Sanders. This must shock you.
Look, this is a real problem. But what we've got to do as Democrats now is we've got to hold this party accountable. When Tom Perez was first elected chair of the DNC, the very first conversation I had with him is to say, you have got to put together a Democratic Party in which everybody can have confidence that the party is working for Democrats rather than Democrats are working for the party. And he's being tested now. This is a test for Tom Perez. And either he's going to succeed by bringing Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders representatives into this process, and they're going to say it's fair, it works, we all believe it, or he's going to fail. And I very much hope he succeeds. I hope for Democrats everywhere. I hope for Bernie and for all of Bernie's supporters that he's going to succeed.
Very quickly, Senator, do you agree with the notion that it was rigged?
It is a very one-sided and unfair one, but I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit.
Well, that's President Trump, of course, wrapping up his Asia trip now. 13 days, chock full of diplomacy and pageantry. You know, one of the highlights was his meeting in China with President Xi to try and put more pressure on North Korea and Kim Jong-un, rebalance trade. He signed $250 billion in new business deals and strengthened the ties between our two nations. And you know, we're used to scenes like this, but the China breakthrough started with President Richard Nixon. You know, he embarked on his historic visit back in 1972, a move that opened China to the West. So what are the results of President Trump's trip on his legacy? Christopher Cox knows the reaction firsthand. He is President Nixon's grandson. Chris is son of Edward Cox and Tricia Nixon Cox. He's a North Africa and Asian political expert and founder of the financial advisory firm OC Global Partners. Chris, welcome. Your grandfather was basically responsible for bringing China into the modern world. So how do you think he would judge the president's efforts?
I think he'd be very impressed by what's going on today with the president's trip, Eric. If you look at the progress that was made on trade, as you mentioned, the $250 billion of deals that were signed with U.S. companies and Chinese companies, that's a tremendous boost to the U.S. economy, and it's very favorable for our country. And then if you look geopolitically, which of course was my grandfather's major area of interest, I think President Trump has been brilliant. If you look at strengthening the trilateral security cooperation between South Korea and Japan and the U.S. as it pertains to North Korea, that is no easy task. Japan and South Korea have governments that have traditionally had different opinions as to how to handle North Korea. And for President Trump to balance that and to strengthen that relationship is a huge accomplishment that he should get a lot of credit for.
Yeah, I mean, he really has been having these meetings, both here and there. I mean, something else that you see that reminded me of your grandfather, in a sense. Is there a new global realism, do you think?
Yeah.
We've got 3 aircraft carrier battle groups, for example, right now, showing American power.
Yes, absolutely. Focusing on this approach of coercive diplomacy, bringing together countries that may not share our ideological beliefs but have common interests with the United States is certainly the basis of realistic foreign policy. And I think that President Trump is focusing on that. And I think that it's really going to start to pay dividends. North Korea is a menace to the world, and President Trump is beautifully balanced, having to deal with security issues with Japan and South Korea, with China's interests in North Korea. And he's beautifully balanced that on this trip, and I couldn't be more impressed with it.
But at the same time, China hasn't gone far enough. I mean, the critics say, you know, they haven't cut off the oil. They've cut off the coal, but the North Korean businesses haven't been cut off yet. There's still North Korean companies in Beijing. They've been told to get out, but that hasn't happened yet. And the North Korean workers who kick back a lot of money to Pyongyang, you know, they're still working. I mean, what do you say to the critics who say that the president has not been able to, pressure China enough to do more to stop Kim Jong-un.
These critics need to realize that it took my grandfather 4 years from the beginning of his presidency, almost 4 years, to be able to pull off his successful trip to China. And you have to give President Trump time. And I think that he's been moving quickly and efficiently, and that he's doing the right approach with China. It's ultimately not within China's interest to have a nuclear North Korea. If North Korea were to ever use a nuclear weapon or even test an atmospheric nuclear weapon, a lot of that blowback of nuclear fallout would fall on China. A lot of the ramifications for a failed state in North Korea would affect China greatly in terms of refugees coming across the Chinese border. So I think it's within China's interest to want to solve this problem. And I think that President Trump is very smart to work through diplomatic efforts and also to show the strength of the United States military. As you said, positioning 3 aircraft carriers off the coast of North Korea to conduct exercises. That's very, very important. And all that will go towards pushing China to do more to solve the North Korean issue.
And finally, at the same time while that's going on, you got the tweets, you've got all the other, controversies. Does that, overshadow, do you think, accomplishments? I mean, your grandfather had that, and he went off to China with that great diplomatic breakthrough.
I think that when judging President Donald Trump's record, we need to look at the results and the facts. And the facts show that there's been improvement in how the United States and China are cooperating on North Korea. The sanctions that China has put in place are some of the strongest that we've ever seen in terms of dealing with North Korea. And that's the right approach to handling it. I think when you look at trade agreements that Donald Trump signed with China in terms of, well, he hasn't signed them, but the U.S. companies have signed under Donald Trump's presidency with China, that's indicative of a policy that's succeeding. And I think that when you look at those facts, Donald Trump's making great progress. And let the tweets say what they will. I think actions matter more than words, and the actions have been quite impressive.
Yeah, Chief of Staff John Kelly today telling reporters that he doesn't pay attention to the tweets, that it's about strategy. Chris Cox, the grandson of President Richard M. Nixon, who opened up China so many years ago, and we are the beneficiaries, some of us are, of that. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see how the president's strategy works. Chris, thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Okay.